Chapter 13. Peeking out from behind the McDonald's was the white Tijuana arch with a widescreen TV entangled in the center like a fly on a spider web playing commercials. El Arco! This is the one he'd been looking for. Efren thought it looked like the top half of a Ferris wheel, the kind the church sets up in their parking lot once a year, only this one didn't have any baskets to ride on. Finally, he was so close to Ama he could feel it. Everywhere he turned, stores with their front shutters rolled up were opening for business. However, even with all the zooming cars and street vendors hollering their best offers, the place felt strangely calm, as if the entire block had prepared for a huge block party and all the guests decided not to show up. Efren sidestepped a gray-haired man dressed in a complete mariachi getup, his eyes wide and friendly, his face full of years. The move caused Efren to bump into the teenager standing at the newspaper stand. The teen, wearing faded jeans and a red tie, snapped harshly at him. Cuidado! Oh, disculpe, Efren said apologetically. He couldn't look like a tourist. He needed to act like he lived there. But blending in was going to be harder than he thought, especially with all the new and interesting things to see. All around him, vendors held up heavy fleece blankets, perfect for cold winter nights, colorful mesh bags used for grocery shopping, lucha libre wrestling masks, a variety of superhero piñatas, and the always popular Mexican sarapes. What they were selling made perfect sense. What didn't was why they were all calling out to him in English. It was true that he was an outsider who didn't really belong, but how did they know this? Was it something in the way he dressed, the way he walked? Maybe the way he looked at everything with new eyes. He searched the crowd, comparing the sea of brown skin. The range was huge, an entire color swatch of different shades. There were so many vendors there, people like Lalo struggling to find their place in this strange world. Just as a sadness began to grow in the pit of his stomach, a pair of kids, a boy and a girl, cut him off. In their hands was a pair of tin flowers made from striped slits of Coca-Cola cans. Did you guys make these? Unsure of his question, the little boy and girl turned toward each other and shrugged. Ustedes lo, but Efren stopped himself mid-sentence as he looked down at their hands. There was no need to ask in Spanish. The answer was obvious as the dirty band-aids at the ends of their fingers. Efren remembered the pesos Appa had given him, but the number of pesos he had on him wouldn't be enough to help these kids. Efren reached into the shirt and pulled out the satchel with the money meant for saving Ama. From the wad of money, he peeled away a pair of $20 bills and handed them to the kids. It was the right thing to do. Efren knew Ama would have done the exact same thing if she were there now. But that didn't make what he'd done any safer. Efren immediately tucked the satchel back under his shirt and looked around for any wandering eyes that might have seen him. Sure enough, he spotted two women staring at him, whispering something to each other. What had he done? Before giving either kid a chance to thank him, Efren hurried through the marketplace as quickly as he could, but with each step he took, a little voice at the back of his mind warned him. As Efren made his way out of the marketplace, he thought about how lucky he was to have been raised on the other side of the border. He remembered all the times he'd secretly wished he were one of the rich kids that lived in the Floral Park neighborhood around his school. The times he wished he might have had his own room, own TV, own bed. None of those things mattered to him anymore. All he wanted was his family at home in their tiny studio apartment together. Ama and Appa didn't like to talk too much about why they left their home so long ago, for a better life seemed to be their only answer. Only now Efren was beginning to understand what they'd left behind. Just as Efren hurried past the last stand, something caught his eye. A few feet away stood the ruins of an aqueduct, the arch barely standing. It was the same Roman-like structure he'd read about in his social studies books. Wait, which of the two arches was he supposed to follow? He looked over at the giant silver landmark above, but the street under it appeared to end. The aqueduct arc led to a colorful street where he could see a hotel sign up ahead. That has to be the one. The Taco Loco had to be nearby. Efren followed the aqueduct arches down the most colorful street he'd ever seen. It was as if each building had somehow been painted in a different fruit flavor. To his left and toward the bottom of a giant lemon-colored wall stood the opening to a tiny shop. Efren skipped over many of the words on the homemade sign, finding comfort in familiar ones like dulces, jugos, and paletas, all the delicious snacks he'd find for sale in Don Tapatillo's food truck back home. To his right stood Hotel Santa Cecilia, painted in the color of the watermelon agua fresca Ama occasionally made in the summertime. This thought made Efren feel better about where Ama had landed. He pictured her in the marketplace, making friends with the vendors like she did around the neighborhood at home. That all changed, however, once he passed the lime-colored Rio Verde bar. With every stick Efren took, the bright flavor colors on each building grew darker, as if coated by a layer of dirt and ash. He paused, noticing the women standing at the curb watching him. His eyes moved to the men across the street watching too. He quickened his pace until he reached the end of the block. There he looked over his shoulder. The men were close behind him and coming closer. A pause warning echoed in his mind and panic set in. Back in his neighborhood, he knew exactly which fences to climb, which apartments to run to, and which alleyways to avoid. Here the dangers were new. He'd heard stories of people being picked up off the streets and never heard from again. He'd also heard about drug cartels and corruption. He scanned the street, catching a glimpse of a papaya-colored building, the Taco Loco. Hoping for exactly that, he broke into a full sprint. This time around, he didn't bother to apologize to anyone he bumped into along the way, and still the people he slammed into acted as if witnessing a panic-stricken kid running through the streets was simply an everyday occurrence. Stopping at an alto sign, he coughed and heaved with his hands resting over his knees. The only other street available looked even worse than the one he found himself in. Again he looked over his shoulder. The men chasing him stopped as well, breaking into menacing smiles as if they knew something he did not. "Hey, little man," a voice called out. He felt a surge of relief when he saw the familiar taxi skid over to where he was. "Get in," shouted Lalo, reaching behind him to swing the back door open. Efren turned to look back at the men who had been following him. They weren't smiling anymore. He jumped into the car, bumping the back of his head as the car's acceleration flung his body across the back seat. "Whoa, little man, what are you doing away from the plaza? This is definitely not the place for a kid like you." "I was looking for the Loco Tacos to see my mom. If you mean El Taco Loco, it's about half a block from the marketplace." He pointed in the other direction. "That way." Efren rubbed his temples before looking down at his watch. It was just 10 past noon. "Can you take me there now? My mom's gotta be there waiting for me." "Nah, man, no can do. Those guys are dangerous, in ways you can't imagine. We better hang low for a bit. Trust me, if your mom is waiting for you, she won't go anywhere." "But I'm sorry, you'd be putting both our lives in danger, not to mention your mother's." Efren didn't like the sound of that. "Well, what do I do in the meantime?" "You can join me for lunch. That okay with you?" Efren's mind raced. He knew better than to talk to strangers, but what choice did he have? Like it or not, Lalo was his best bet right now. Besides, there was something about Lalo that made Efren trust him. Tijuana was different than Efren had imagined. He stared out the window, marveling at the scraps of sheet metal used to cover what in some cases appeared to be walls of cardboard. Those homes that were lucky enough to include plywood and cinder blocks looked to have been built on top of each other. "Lalo, why are the homes in the hills so ghetto?" Yeah. "This is the land no one wants. On this side of the border, the rich folk here all live on flat land." Efren's eyes roamed. This place was nothing like home. Lalo's place wasn't much different from the rest of the neighborhood, just a tiny room barely large enough to fit one twin mattress, one rickety bookshelf, and a propane burner to cook. "I know it ain't much, but I mostly just sleep here. Besides, the less money I spend here, the more I can send my little girl." Lalo turned and pointed at a photo resting over a milk crate beside his bed. His daughter was about the same age as Max and Mia, but she had light, wavy hair and hazel eyes. "She's adorable. It's probably my favorite. Anyway, little man, make yourself at home. You mind if I use your restroom? Again?" "Yeah, my stomach acts up when I get nervous." "Well, you good now, bro. It's just outside to the right. If the door is closed, don't go in. One of the neighbors may be using it." Efren went out through the back door. The outside area wasn't much better. Over to the side was the outhouse. He stepped inside and slid shut the plank of wood that doubled as a door. He looked down at the bucket of water stored beside the toilet, vowing to never complain about having to wait his turn at home again. He layered the seat in toilet paper. When he was done, he picked up the bucket. He'd learned about this trick from Pa once when the water to their apartment was shut off, and emptied it into the bowl. Somehow the toilet flushed. Efren refilled the bucket and washed his hands with the nearby hose, then hurried back inside where Lalo had prepared a set of instant ramen soups. "Bro, you like maruchan? Do you have any tapatio?" Lalo pointed to a bottle beside the bunny ear TV antenna. Come on now. What kind of homie doesn't have tapatio in his crib?" Efren smiled and ate half-heartedly. "Hey, little man, don't worry, I got you. How about we go down to El Muro till things cool down?" Efren checked his watch. "My dad's kind of waiting for me across the border. I know you want to get back, but waiting around here isn't gonna get you there any faster. Come on." "All right," he said, slurping the last of the noodles. Efren followed Lalo back outside and waited for him to unlock the back door of the taxi. "What you doing?" Lalo asked, sticking his head out the driver's seat. "We're bros now. You can sit up front from now on." Efren dashed across the passenger side and slid back into his seat, cool like Lalo did. "So what's this Muro you're taking me to?" he asked. Lalo laughed. "The Muro is the iron wall that separates us from the U.S. side. It ends where the ocean waves begin to form." "Beaches? I've never heard of any beaches in TJ." Lalo pointed up ahead as he made a turn. "See there? That's the Pacific. Same water on both sides of the wall." Efren leaned forward for a better look. "Looks kind of like the beaches at home." "Yep." Lalo brushed the tip of his nose. "Sometimes I come around here, buy myself a drink, and stare out into the ocean thinking about my little girl. There's usually a parent or two running around with their kids. I gotta admit," his voice broke a tiny bit, "it still hurts, makes me feel robbed." Efren glanced over at him. "I'm sorry." He scoffed. "At least I've got my memories to keep me company. Memories of me rocking her in my arms back and forth, of me making up baby rap songs about us." Lalo's jaw tightened. "You know what I miss most?" he continued while gazing out at the sea. "It's the way she used to look up at me, like she knew who I was. She didn't see a high school dropout, didn't see the tats on my arms or back. She just accepted me. Unconditional love, bro. Anyway, my little Abby knew that I loved her and trusted that I would do anything and everything to protect her. Then she'd shut her eyes and be out for like 3 hours. 3 hours? It sounded like something Mia would do." Lalo sniffed and exhaled deeply. "Yeah, 3 wonderful hours with her against my chest. Stuff like that has a way of changing people." Lalo wiped the bridge of his nose. Efren wiped his eyes. "The worst part is how the only memories she has of me now are behind the iron beams of the Muro. Lord knows I haven't lived a perfect life, but I ain't no criminal. Unfortunately, that's not how she sees me. To her, I'm nothing more than an embarrassment. Just some tatted up vato that sends her money and writes letters that she occasionally answers. She can write at her age?" Lalo laughed heartily. "My baby girl isn't a baby anymore. The photo you saw is old. She's a teenager with her own life to live, in the States where she belongs." Just like that, Lalo slipped a new CD into the stereo and cranked up the volume so loud that he cringed. "Check this out, it's my jam," he said, dropping the volume just a pitch. Efren had no idea who the rapper was, but he bobbed his head up and down as Lalo sang out loud. Efren mumbled along as best he could, occasionally skipping out over words he wasn't yet allowed to say. Looking out the window was a glimpse of an entirely new world. Yes, the place was simple and poor looking, but it was also kind of beautiful. There were no ridiculous mansions hogging the ocean view or fancy hotels catering to the rich. Instead, there were tiny stands advertising fresh coconuts and shrimp cocktails. "You know, Lalo, this place is kind of nice." "It can be." Lalo parked alongside a white curb that extended below a white lighthouse tower. Efren examined the miniature palm trees and uneven paths ahead. He couldn't decide if the place looked more like a skate park or a miniature golf course. "This is it, the Muro. Come on." Efren followed Lalo up the ramp where families of every size lined the rusted iron beams, many unfolding beach chairs. "What are they doing?" "Visiting with families." Lalo pointed to the other side of the fence. "See people from the U.S. line up, and when their turn comes up, they get to hold hands with the family they're separated from. It's how I got to watch my daughter grow up." Lalo placed his hand on Efren's shoulder and paused like he had something to say, only he didn't speak a word, just started walking toward the empty beach. Efren's eyes searched the many faces along the fence. They came in all sorts, from babies to elderly folk with walkers, all different beautiful shades of brown. Efren began walking alongside the iron barrier. There were as many smiles as there were tears. A woman leaned into the space between the beams. She poked her arm through. She was about the same height as Ama, with a familiar pinto bean shade of skin. Efren walked closer, curious about what she was doing. The answer hit him. Immediately, his eyes stung as if they'd been rubbed with a ripe jalapeno. Less than 10 feet away was a mother and daughter, her SeaWorld hat still on, resting their foreheads against the other, each with their eyes closed, tears flowing. He patted his shirt. Feeling the satchel underneath his shirt helped calm and reassure him. He looked over at the rest of the families camping around the sidewalk, waiting for their turn to hold hands too. Efren walked up to the iron fence and held up his palm against it. How was it possible that he was allowed to cross to either side? His place of birth didn't change anything about him. It didn't make him better than anyone else. It just made him lucky. Plain, simple, dumb luck. Efren came up behind Lalo and took a seat next to him beside the invisible line where the ocean waves broke before retreating. Hey, are you all right? Lalo asked. Efren took a moment before answering. I don't get it. What don't you get? Why people don't just hire a coyote and come over anyway, like Ama's going to do. His face lit up. I know. You could tag along. You and Ama could cross together. Hold up, Lalo said, turning to face him. It's not that simple. You can't just walk across. I know, that's why we got the money. My dad took on some extra night work to get it. But it's here with me, see? Efren reached under his shirt for the satchel and pulled out the wad of money he had. Ama found a coyote who promised to get her across. Right at the hotel she found on the Avenida Revolucion. All I need to do is deliver this to her. Then we can go back to the way things were. We can be a family again. Lalo went silent. What's wrong? Is it not enough? First, do us both a favor and put that money away. Lalo surveyed the beach to make sure no one was watching. Look, man, as much as I'd like to, I'm not gonna lie to you. Getting across isn't as easy as you think. Using a coyote to cross along the customs line is pricey, but crossing over by the desert, he shook his head. I wouldn't try it not again. And the local polleros are too risky. Some of them promise to get you across, but instead they just take your money and dump you into the desert to fend for yourself. But they're not all bad, right? Look, I know a few guys who work this area. I can't make you any promises, but I can call and see if they might be able to help you guys out. What about you? Don't you want to see your daughter? Of course I do, more than anything else. But without a license or social security number, there isn't much I can do to make a living there. Besides, I've got a record, so if I get caught again, I'll definitely do some serious time behind bars. He rubbed his chin as he continued, but you don't have to worry about me. I'll make do. Sadly, it's what our people are best at, making do. Efren took a moment to let the words sink in. Then he looked at Lalo and tried reading the letters just below his knuckles, only the tattoo was too faded to read. Did you do something bad? Nah, man. Well, nothing too serious. He stared out blankly at the sea as if entranced by the motion of the waves. Simply put, I hung around the wrong type of friends, didn't think for myself. Lalo gave Efren a look. Little man, do yourself a favor. Surround yourself with good people. People who will bring out the good in you, not the bad. Efren thought about David, about how lucky he was to have a friend like him. Scratch that. Had him as a friend. But it wasn't like he could just quit the election. Jennifer had been right. Él era una semilla, and he needed to push through the dirt and reach for the sunlight. I think you're a great guy. You shouldn't give up. Give up? Lalo laughed. Trust me, if there's one thing I don't do, it's give up. Here's the thing. All I want out of life is for my Abby to grow up happy with a good job, maybe a family. That's it. Everything else is gravy. Lalo scratched at the tip of his nose. I just want what every parent wants for their children, a better life. Efren's forehead wrinkled. A better life without you? Efren nodded ever so slightly. A better life for her.